Hi, welcome to podcast number 5. I thought I'd just summarize podcast 1, 2, 3, 4, and then I realized that could easily take a lot of time. So I'm just going to go back to a little bit of podcast 4 and then introduce you to all the stuff I want to go through in podcast number 5, which is on free will and determination. Very, very interesting, I thought, in podcast 4 was the fact that introducing a psychedelic drug into your system, which then will end up in your brain, um, even if you only do it once, can completely change your sense of self and your sense of reality and what's true and imagined. Make you self-aware of perception and so forth. That's just amazing because if you change your brain chemistry, to use the easiest concept of explaining what psychedelic drugs do, um, your sense of self changes, which means that this experience of me or you or we, hey, I'm Michael, and all of this stuff happening to me, my ego, the narration of myself, is a product of brain activity, the action of my mind. That is mind-boggling. It's almost like the rug is pulled from underneath my feet, your feet, our feet. That means we're living lives as all the comedy and drama and successes and failures and you name it, um, completely made up through brain networks. Oh my word. What a revelation. That's just mind-boggling. So, reflecting on these things, already early in my life, I intuitively had so many perceptions that proved to be wrong, that I was alert to this fact, hey, oh, what is going on? You could call me an existentialist. I'm happy about that. Doesn't matter to me. Um, but going through high school is a very high level of education in the Netherlands that I had, because in Netherlands, high school education is different if you want to go to university, or you can even become a housewife, a tradie, do an admin job. They have 3, 4, 5, and 6-year high schools. So I went to the 6-year high school to enable me to go to university. So I learned a lot about um, physics, and I've gone into this about this thing called plasma. So in my worldly experience, I was aware of solid, liquid, and gaseous, but then there was this plasma thing. So the universe is not empty, it's full of plasma, which is electrical. And I looked into that on, I think it was podcast 3. Um, yeah, but planets and stars are mostly gaseous as well and not solid. Like the sun goes up to 30,000 degrees Celsius or more, but it's a gas. So how is that held together? There must be some form, some mode of consciousness and intelligence holding that together, which is another thing that I learned, that consciousness is not just my consciousness. There's an intelligence and therefore consciousness in all things. That's a pen. But, sorry, H. How do the elements and atoms and molecules and so forth hold each other together in this form? Venus is a gaseous planet. It's 5,000 degrees Celsius. But if I have a gas bottle and I open it up and I don't connect it to my barbecue, for example, I intuitively feel that gas is just going to disperse in the empty space, which I'm intuitively wrong about as well, because the space is not empty. And so it's like, whoa, I get it wrong intuitively a lot. So what's the point? Well, not only do you get things intuitively wrong, um, also when we think about free will and understanding our mind, we get it wrong. So we are always reacting to something. Our brain is just this like operation or action of guessing what's going on, and we do get it wrong, like I just said. Getting more sensory information coming in and then adjusting the gas. Now, this is not a slow process. This happens regardless of the self-awareness that I have, you have, we have, and in millions of seconds. So in 1 second, our brains have already have done this in and out going idea of this is what's happening. That's the feedback. Oh, I was wrong. Let's adjust that. And on and on and on and on and on. So we're very actively part in creating the reality as we experience it. Wow. Now we believe we choose our own actions and decisions, but we don't. We'll see that. The other thing, when you're responding and reacting all of the time, it means you're not free. You always, whether you like it or not, have to respond in your mind to what seems to be going on. We are therefore not free. We are determined by an ongoing perceptional reality that causes us inescapably to respond. Now, it includes the response of denying. Put to the hand, put to the hand. That is a response. Or just being quiet and ignoring something or someone. That is a response as well. So respond you must and shall. Now, within that realm, of course, there's flexibility, and that is absolutely necessary for survival and procreation. Now, to see how strongly this is in our mindset, the Lord's Prayer. I'm not religion, I'm not Christian, but I can look up the Lord's Prayer, and in there it said, Father, thine will be done on earth as it is in heaven. So it's interesting. There's two. There's heaven, there's earth, there's the will of the Father, and there's the will of us. Obviously, we're not very good at willing, and what we will causes disaster and is evil or whatever, and therefore we just hand over the will to the Father. So I had to look at this Father concept, number one, and I was familiar with traditional Chinese medicine, and they have these 5 elements, and in the 5 elements they have like a circle consequential connection, and it is the mother to the son. So in these 5 elements, the element in the circle that comes before the next element is the mother who nourishes the son. So for example, the fire element, it burns everything to ashes which go into the earth, and therefore it nourishes the earth. But there's also this 5-pointed star kind of relationship. So the element 2 spots before, say, the earth element, that is wood. Wood controls the earth. So it's like the tree with its root systems that holds the earth together and controls it. So you have these 2 different relationships. Mother, son, father, son. Sorry, there's no daughter in that. I didn't make it up. As someone in my classes pointed out to me, that's because it's written by men, not by females. So yeah, I don't want to go into that at the moment. We now say there's cause and effect. We don't say mother, son, or father, son. But this idea that the father controls the son, that seems to be permanent in the mindset of, for example, the early Christians and perhaps Jesus, if he really um, came forward with this, our Lord's Prayer, because there's the Aramaic version and the original version, the true version, the wrong version, the King James's version, and so forth. So, yeah, very human to have lots of different versions. So the idea, though, is that the father controls. And we see that in early Christianity, when Christianity was adopted by the Roman system of governance, then we get this idea that the father is the head of the family. And it's an extended family. It's just not, his wife and his children, but it's everyone else that works at the farm or in the business. That's the idea of the cornerstone of society. And of course, in a Christian-based culture, that's still the case. The family, although maybe not as extended as now, is the cornerstone of our society. That's what Christianity teaches. Okay, so we come on this idea of will, free will. Do we have it? Or if so, should we hand it over? Or is there no things as free will, determinism? So I've got about 25 different points I'm going to discuss with you. I'm going to introduce you to Brian Klaas, and when I go into it, I'll give his credentials. But he speaks about the delusion of individualism, and particularly he points the question, it is very comfortable to think you are in control of your own life, but are you? And then second section is on behavioral influences and the fact that most of them are happening beneath our conscious awareness, but these behavioral influences guide our attention, define what feels true, determine what options we believe are available. We're going to look at that session number 3, elephant rider metaphor. And the elephant contains our emotions, our deepest motivations, all of our unconscious biases and heuristics, and the rider is our conscious self. And we're going to see that the rider can suggest, but the elephant decides. I'm going to look at enlightenment, how to break free from all this. And like in the Course in Miracles, for example, it says, all that's needed is a little willingness. But what is that? And does it really work? I'm going to touch on the holy instant. And we looked at that at postcard 4, that it's so easy to talk about this, but you cannot force anything of it. And should we contrast willpower maybe with surrender? Course in Miracles, chapter 4, it goes into that the repetition compulsions can be endless until they are given up by an act of will. So there we have that will again. In chapter 18 of Course in Miracles, it speaks about a little willingness again. And in chapter 31 about choose once again. But are we talking about will or determination? Well, let's look into it. Then in the next section, we are already in section 7 or something. Explore what an act of will truly means. And should we release the illusion of control to create space for determination, authentic determination to guide us? Mhm. Then the next section, I'm going to look at the features of volitional experiences. And like Emil Seth points out, volitional experience are actually self-fulfilling perceptional inferences that then bring about voluntary actions. And there's 3 features to that. We're going to look at brain networks, we're going to look at the Libet experiments and the awareness potential. John Dylan Haynes' research on that consciousness witnesses decisions unfolding from deeper layers of mind and being, but that this can also open doorways if you are willing, being receptive to quiet, steady determination. Section 12, what is the aspect of being you cling to most tightly? feeling of being in control of your actions, or of being the author of your thoughts? I will introduce you to Bernard Kastrup, who is a believer of idealism. Remember in podcast 2 about different types of theories on consciousness. So idealism says that consciousness is the primary reality. We're looking at the universe playing view, and at the idea that human thinking has that says could have been, things could have been different if I chose different. If I only had done this, if I only done that, then things would work out differently. But idealism says that what you decide to do is both what you want to do above all else and what you must do. There is no such thing as a free will. I will show you a little bit of what Eckhart Tolle has to say about this. In particular, self-awareness is the key to freedom, only to realize that if you progress in your pursuit of enlightenment, you will see that there is no such thing as free will. I will look at transitional perceptions. I will look at the point of view of Alex O'Connor, who is an existentialist, about the idea of agency and determinism. And we also will go into predeterminism. It's the idea that nothing happens by chance. Also, the inability to control your desires. Reflecting predetermination and randomness. Both actually say there is no control. And also going to look at near-death experiences where people say, like, no, I predetermined everything. I chose my parents, I chose to have cancer, etc., etc. Going to look at some of the insight of Arthur Schopenhauer. Man can do what he wills, but he cannot will what he wills. Going to introduce you to Rob Sapolsky. We're going to contrast libertarian free will with hard determinism. I'm going to show you an idea around healing, where a person in a near-death experience discovered that what needs to happen is the unwinding of the deeper choice behind the experience. The original plan or agreement must be released and realigned. I'm going to look at the journey back from the illusion of being in control to being a living expression of unfolding reality, and let authentic determination lead the way. I'm going to look at being in the present moment. What does that actually mean? I'm going to look at meditation. It's just another strategy to feel in charge. Or what can you use it for? I'm going to look at manifesting meditation and manifesting. And then finally about what I call real transformation, which I've constructed into my course called Everyday Miracles. All right, so let's begin. Cheers.
Western modernity has an obsession with what I call the delusion of individualism. And it is comforting to a lot of people to think that they're in control of their own lives, so that they are the ones who are driving change, and that it's not really up to other people, that your life unfolds the way you want it to. Or if you're a politician, that you can control the way the economy is going to work out or the way the election is going to turn out. Now, the problem with this, of course, is that there's a lot of different ways about thinking of the world, and one of them is Eastern philosophy, which thinks a lot more about the intersections between people and the relational idea of how we're all connected. Now, I think this is scientific fact. I think we are all connected, and we pretend otherwise. And there's a story that's sort of a strange story that I saw in the press while I was researching Fluke, about a person who went swimming off the coast of Greece, a man named Ivan. And Ivan goes out into the sea, and he's not the best swimmer, and a riptide basically sucks him out into the ocean. Now, his friends are pretty upset about this because he disappears from sight and they can't find him. And there's about 24 hours where Ivan is missing at sea, And we all know how these stories turn out when someone is missing at sea for 24 hours. Except for in this story, right as Ivan is about to slip beneath the waves and drown, he spots a soccer ball bobbing on the surface of the ocean. Now, that's already extraordinary enough. You have this moment where he just is saved by this passing soccer ball that's floating, and he clings to it and is eventually rescued. But the more extraordinary part of the story is that when this news made the Greek television reports, there was a woman who was watching the news, and I sort of imagined her, dropping her cup of coffee or whatever as they see the soccer ball on the screen, because she recognized the ball. And she knew that her children had been playing with that exact same ball and had accidentally kicked it off a cliff, 80 miles away from where Ivan eventually intersected with the trajectory of that ball, bobbing on the sea 10 days later. And the point is that, the kids would look at this and they would think, oh no, we kicked the ball off the cliff. Let's buy another ball. They would have no idea. But it turned out that kick is what saved the life of another person who was about to drown. Now, when you think that way, it's extremely obvious that there's an interconnection between those lives. The problem is that there's not some magic that Ivan had. It's that everybody is actually unfolding in this way where we're constantly being affected by the actions of people we will never see and never meet. And the extremely obvious way that we can understand this as well is the pandemic from the coronavirus outbreak in 2020, where you have a single person get infected with a virus in Wuhan, China, and the lives of 8 billion people change for many, many years. And the trajectories of our lives are irrevocably changed. All of us are different because of this pandemic. And it's from one virus infecting one person, potentially thousands of miles away from where you live, and everything in the world became different. So this is the nature of reality. And I think it's something that's a coping mechanism effectively for us to just ignore the science, ignore the physics, and imagine that we are in charge. And this is where that saying that I come back to throughout Fluke arises, which is we control nothing, but we influence everything. And for Ivan and the soccer ball, the influence that he experienced was from a couple of kids he will never have met who saved his life.
So, according to Brian and his use, very acceptable and highly regarded evidence to come to this conclusion is that we do not control our will or power to choose. So I want to look at that behavioral influences, like what influences to guide our attention, to define what feels true, to determine what options we believe are available. Because there are literally thousands, perhaps countless of these behavioral influences called bias, heuristic, stereotyping, you name it. They shape every act of will. Not just some, not the majority, not a significant number. Every act of will, choice, or decision making. So it's interesting, to note, because this is loaded, these sentences, that will, choice, or decision making are an act, an action of our mind. So most of them operate beneath conscious awareness. So you can see how important it is to look at Jung's shadow work. Like so many philosophers have said, in religions, self-awareness will set you free. So they silently guide attention, define what feels true, and even determine what options we believe are available. Yeah? Got your attention. What do you see and what don't you see? Remember the confirmation bias? Biggie. Optimism bias? Biggie. Bandwagon effect? Biggie. I just watched a little recording from Sunrise's Channel 7 News on the latest poll they performed. It's the 23rd of June 2026. And if we had an election today, according to that poll, it would be a hung election. Labour 51%, One Nation with Paula Hansen 49%. So to ask two political experts, commentators, what their thoughts were on this particular poll outcome. So the female who was in the studio said, look, governments are not voted in, but governments are voted out. Look what happened to the National Liberal Party's government at the last election. Peter Dutton thought he had things in the bag and he didn't even get elected himself in his own electorate in Brisbane. So people are obviously not happy with the Labour National Party, and Labour is losing ground because people are not happy with Labour. She said if she interviewed people that were supporting One Nation this time around, and she asked, can you mention to me one policy of One Nation, they became angry and aggravated and insulting. Basically, they didn't know or just even one policy, but that was their reaction. So then the reportage changed to the male who was in his office in Sydney, and he said, yeah, well, the big parties had plenty of time, decades, to govern this country in a right way and in a way that people perceive as positive, and they have failed. They have totally lost connection with the voters. They're just off doing their own thing and think they have things in the bag, and it's not true. So logically, then people start looking for an alternative. In this case, it's Paula Hansen. So there's probably a lot of biases and heuristics actively working there. So yeah, a very, very important. Imagine your mind as a rider sitting on top of an elephant, walking down a path. The rider represents your conscious self, the part of you that thinks you're in control. But here's the truth. The rider isn't really steering. The elephant is. And the elephant represents your emotions, your deepest motivations, and your unconscious biases. Represents what you want most and what you must do. So we feel like we're making rational, conscious decisions, but our emotional and unconscious mind is guiding the way. The rider can suggest, we call this conscious intention, but the elephant decides where to go, and we call this unconscious conditioning. Let's recap. And I hope you agree, I have been putting this out over and over in all of the podcasts. But here we go. Every day, your mind projects reality and makes choices through biases and mental shortcuts, many of which you may not even realize. These patterns influence how you see the world, hold onto beliefs, and make choices. But when you bring them into awareness, something incredible happens. You free yourself. So I put together 4 pages with 6 biases each. But like I said, there's tons and tons and tons of them. But let's get going. The affect heuristic. Emotions override logic. I think that speaks for itself. Belief perseverance. We hold on to beliefs even when faced with contradictory evidence. Maybe easy to see in others, but not as easy to admit to ourselves? The Einstellung effect. Now, Einstellung is German, how things is a setting or tuned in. Previous knowledge blocks new insights. Again, maybe easy to see in others, but not so easy to admit to ourselves. Pessimism bias, the tendency to overestimate negative outcomes and limit your own potential. So please reflect and journal. Probably plenty of examples you can give on that. Bounded reality bias, the false belief that your perspective is the own reality. This bias makes the world a scary place, if you ask me. Sunk cost fallacy. We struggle to let go. Yes, that's why we have psychotherapy, helping you to let go under hypnosis, or doing visualizations, helping you to let go, meditations to let go. Tons of books just on letting go. We struggle to let go, even when something no longer benefits us. Gambler's fallacy. The belief that past events influence the likelihood of future outcomes, even when they are completely independent. So you're at the roulette and the call has been black 7 times in a row. So surely red must come up. But the chances between red and black are 50-50, no matter what happened before. Gambler's fallacy. Next one, hot hand fallacy from the gambling world. You believe that because things have been going well, they will continue to go well. Yep. My wife loves to watch this show called The Tipping Point just before the news. And you can see the hot hand fallacy. We're on a roll. Let's just keep going. Yeah, you're on a roll until you're no longer. Rosy retrospection, the tendency to remember the past as better than it actually was. I can still remember how it was in the 1980s. Music was fantastic. No. Rosy retrospective. You understand what I'm saying. Naive realism. It convinces you that your perceptions are accurate reflections of reality, making it hard to imagine others could see things differently and still be right as well. I think this is one for easy to see in others, not that easy to admit to ourselves. Yeah. Negativity bias, it causes us to focus on what's wrong in ourselves, in others, in the world, blocking the light of shared healing and reinforcing the illusion of disconnection. Again, easy to see in others, not that easy in ourselves. The self-serving bias, it protects our ego by attributing success to ourselves and blaming external factors for failure, which keeps us stuck in separation and judgment. Authority bias, trusting someone else's opinion over your own inner knowing can make you doubt your worth or potential. So again, trusting someone else's opinion over your own inner knowing can make you doubt your worth or potential. Awful if you have it, but we all do. Disposition effect. Holding on to good past moments and avoiding necessary growth can block true transformation. People who feel they've reached enlightenment, and I was in an organization where many believed they did, from my point of view, not even close, would go like, oh, we're still here. I'm dragging my backside. Yeah. Um, Even this academy is long gone. Um, people are still having reunions and all that kind of stuff. Yeah. Holding on to good past moments and avoiding necessary growth can block true transformation, the disposition effect. Empathy gap. When you're disconnected from others' emotional experiences, it becomes difficult to remember the unity of minds. This separation fuels judgment, and judgment clouds vision. The empathy gap. Again, easy to see in others, not so easy to admit to ourselves. Functional fixedness. It keeps you stuck in how things should look and how you've always done them. You work in hospitals, people were trained a certain way and have done things for a decade or even longer. And yep, believe you me, they're stuck in how things should look. And then fresh staff comes in and they have learned the latest evidence and it can become very frictional. Or when you start a new hospital and people come from their individual workplaces and all have their own way of believing how things should look and how they've always done them. Conflict, people leave, HR has a field day, all that kind of stuff. Functional fixedness. IKEA effect. Overvaluing what you've built simply because you built it can cause you to cling to outdated concepts. So interesting, it's called the IKEA effect. So I won't go too much into it, but I think you got the gist there. Illusion of control. You are not in charge of everything, and that's a good thing. Miracles arise in surrender, and your strength is not in managing life, but in allowing the light of your soul to lead. If you want an explanation, well, this is already podcast 5, but after this podcast, there is still 2 more to come. And you can always do the paid for course that is on the projectlove.app website. Illusory correlation. Believing that 2 unrelated things are connected. Bad things always happen when I try to be happy. Cool example. Illusory truth effect. Repeating a false idea until it feels true. I'm not good enough said often enough begins to sound like fact, but it's not. The just world hypothesis. Believing that the world is always fair and people deserve their misfortunes. Okay. Bias blind spot. Perhaps the trickiest of all. This is a tendency to recognize biases in others while remaining unaware of our own. Just apparently like Jesus says, do not worry about the splinter in your brother's eye. Worry about the beam in your own. Enough said. I know a lot about Jesus. I'm not even religious. Oh, I don't even own a Bible. Anyway, response bias. When we shape our responses not from truth, but from what we think others want to hear. Better not upset Donald Trump. Again, enough said. The acquiescence bias, the tendency to agree automatically with statements or perspectives, even if they don't resonate with our inner truth. And don't you just loathe it when you see other people do it? But are we guilty of that ourselves? Time for some practical, everyday life kind of tips and insights and workability. So if we have an almost endless number of shortcuts in our brain, there's no hope we're going to get rid of it. But to become self-aware that we have it, that we have an elephant, uh, that determines our behavior, um, that's a huge step forward. So I want to link with some of the teachings in A Course in Miracles. In A Course in Miracles, um, it speaks of an act of will. And just so in the heading, that these compulsions of repetition of unconscious shortcuts can be viewed upon as endless, but with an act of will, or as it says more properly, active creation, there can be a stop to us. Now you find this information in chapter 4, and the little willingness is mentioned in chapter 18, and the choose once again is mentioned in chapter 31. But it's an ongoing thing. So I want to have a good look what this active will or active creation actually stands for. What does it really mean? And I just put it into 4 steps. And steps denote there is a process, and it's important. Now, the process happens in your brain networks, as we will later see. So they happen without you having to will it, which is funny. So your will is an autonomous process run by your brain. Excuse me, another itch. So it's not free, but particular, we have to see it as a determination. So step 1, consciously we can have intentions. So we as the writer, we can suggest, but the elephant decides where we are going. Remember the unconscious conditioning. Now, the elephant's decision is determined, yes, by what you want most above all else. So what you want most above all else determines your behavior. Okay, let's keep it simple. Stupid. Went to the GP. GP said your cholesterol is high and you need to start exercising. Are you exercising? No. Well, you need to exercise at least half an hour a day, walking, whatever, blah, blah, blah. You decide, okay, I'm going to the gym. You sign up with the gym, have this, subscription, fortnightly payments, whatever. And now you try to motivate yourself. Now, here is where the problem lies. I know there is this program of baby steps, a little bit of improvement every day, James Clean and all that kind of stuff. However, motivation cannot be willed. You cannot force yourself to be motivated about something. You can desperately want it and try and go to the gym and be really, I need this, I need to be healthy, my cholesterol needs to come down. But if it doesn't naturally come from your what you want most above all else, it's going to be a very tough assignment. Yes, so remember with creativity, I said become more of an explorer, find out about things. Yeah, so go to the gym for 3 months and see if you actually really like it. And if you don't like it, above all else, you don't want to go to the gym. It's an experiment, and you're not certain about the outcome of it. Um, Maybe above all else you want a puppy, and puppy needs to be walked. So there you go. You can have exercise happening there. Yes. So if you need to exercise and exercise obviously it's not on the top of your list, otherwise you would do it. Above all else, you would even at your work from A to B, not take lifts, take stairs, because above all else you want to exercise. Yeah, so if you find a couch potato, then become clear about why that is. Yeah, or maybe you're extremely tired and you know, there's lots of possibilities. Find out why that is, and then experiment with what kind of exercise you want. And yes, this is what an active creation means. So, step 3, an active will is therefore a process reflective of what you want above all else. And it can even mean saying no to a desire or creation or decision. Yeah. I should be going, but I am not. It is not free will, as we will find out over and over, but it is a determination sourced in what you want most. Now, this has huge implications. Yeah. So if you have a son or a daughter and you want them to get off their bum and become physically active, you have to start experimenting with them and find out what it is that they want. They want something, you don't have to work on motivation. The motivation will be there. They don't want something, not a chance in the world that their determination will lead to that activity. Okay. Number 4, you cannot will what you will. So a lot of people say, I want to have a holy instant, I want to be enlightened, I want to be connected with the divine, have a conscious contact with God, blah, 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 all that kind of stuff. Well, if you really want that above all else, why isn't it happening? Obviously, something else needs to be happening, and we'll go into that in podcast number 7. Purification is needed first, and particularly you need to get rid of a whole range of stuff that relate basically to guilt. So I have a slide that will say the holy instant is the result of your determination to remember your true self, which in other words means you prepare for it only to the extent of recognizing that you want it above all else. So hopefully you now get to see that will is determined about what you want above all else. And you can't sit there thinking that you have free will and you can will what it is you will. That is a very frustrating, effortless, energy consuming exercise that can lead you to severe depression or wanting to jump off the cliff because something will not happen to you despite you wanting it so much and been boycotting and the devil is stopping you or whatever. No, not true. You need to experiment and see what it is you really, really, really like. Yeah. Some, you might love to read books. How do you find out? By starting to reading books, and then you see like, no, 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 no. But certain fiction you must love, and you see you're naturally motivated to read more and more and more. Binge read, for example. Yeah, so you get the idea. Now, if it's truly is what you want, and that is enlightenment, you have to look at that a different way. You have to start experimenting, mind mapping, journaling, internal reflections, meditation, maybe. I don't know what it is. A lot of people get very creative listening to house music. Yeah. Pump that music and let your creativity come forward of ways to actually become clear what it is you want most. You might have to make up a bucket list and get certain things out of your system. So you feel fulfillment there and you no longer want it. Like if you always wanted a nice house, well, yeah. Even if you rent, you can still do things to design a nice house you can live in, um, or a camper van. Or maybe you want to become a consultant in interior design, help other people design beautiful homes, do websites. So many ways of living out that desire until you no longer need to do it anymore. Um, that you can't say you're stuck. If you're stuck, you're not experimenting. Exploring what an active will or active creation means. So, step one, the writer can suggest, that is conscious intention, but the elephant decides where to go. So, that is unconscious conditioning. Step two, the elephant's decision is determined by what you want most above all else. Step three, an act of will is therefore a process reflective of what you want above all else, which can even mean saying no to a desire or decision. Step four, you cannot will what you will. In A Course in Mirrors, in chapter 18, it speaks of a little willingness, and that concept of a little willingness comes back through the entire book. Now, this is what it says in chapter 18. The holy instant is the result of your determination to remember your true self. You prepare for it only to the extent of recognizing that you want it above all else. So hopefully this makes sense now. There are three defining features of volitional experiences. One, the feeling that I am doing what I want to do. Two, the sense that I could have done otherwise. Three, voluntary actions seem to come from within rather than be imposed externally. So once more, there are three defining features of volitional experiences. One, the feeling that I am doing what I want to do. Number two, the sense that I could have done otherwise. Number three, voluntary actions seem to come from within rather than to be exposed externally. A system has degrees of freedom to the extent that it can respond in multiple ways to a state of affairs. Voluntary behavior depends on the competence to control these degrees of freedom in alignment with beliefs, values, goals, and the demands of the environment and body. This competence is implemented by a network of processes distributed over many brain regions. Again, this competence is implemented by a network of processes distributed over many brain regions. These interwoven processes play out in a continual loop spanning the brain, body, and environment, with no beginning and no end, producing flexible, goal-orientated behavior. This network funnels a vast array of potential causes into a single flow of voluntary actions and, at times, inhibitions. It is the perception of this network that underpins subjective experiences of volition. Again, it is the perception of this network that underpins subjective experience of volition. But we do not have free. This section is crucial in the contrasting of determination and free will. So let's just go back to the first slide, which says experiences of volition, and I'm going to read it from the slide now, so I'll lose eye contact. Experiences of volition are self-fulfilling perceptual inferences that bring about voluntary actions. Okay, self-fulfilling. So basically you put forward what it is that you want. Perceptual, so you want to believe that you have volition, free will, choice. Inferences, and they are perceptional, that bring about voluntary actions. So behavior and actions follow suit with, of course, the act of will, choice, or decisions. With it's a self-fulfilling perception that you freely made these decisions. You freely willed it. You freely chose for that particular action to get into play. Now, without them, and I'll read back from the slide, we could not navigate complex environments or learn from previous voluntary actions to improve future outcomes. Okay, that is amazing. So what it really says is that the elephant drives us, but it puts the onus back on us that, oh, no. You were the one that decided that, not me. So that's not true. And we want to believe it is though, that we are the ones in the driver's seat. So in neuroscience, for example, the accepted knowledge is that there are three defining features of volitional experiences. So I'm reading it from the slide again. The feeling that I am doing what I want to do. The feeling that I am doing what I want to do. And this next one is also extremely crucial to this notion that we have volitional experiences, and that is the sense that I could have done otherwise. That gives you the idea that you truly made a choice. The sense that I could have done otherwise. Well, no, I had another beer, but I had the option to say, no, I'm not going to have the other beer. The sense that I could have done otherwise. And then number three, voluntary actions seem to come from within rather than being posed externally. It's not a preferred state of being to be submissive, to be a slave, to be under a control from somewhere else, someone else. I think that the absolute desire, I would say need to be free, to feel free, is probably one of the strongest needs that anyone can have. We simply do not want to answer to something externally. So therefore, it's very, very comfortable to believe that we are in charge and that we make free decision, free choices, and we have free will. So the three defining features of volitional experiences, I'm reading it out. The feeling that I am doing what I want to do. The sense that I could have done otherwise, and voluntary actions come from within rather than be exposed externally. Okay, so how does that come into play? How is it demonstrated, to use an academic term? Well, a system has degrees of freedom to the extent that it can respond in multiple ways to a state of affairs. Yeah, but which way we respond is determined. Although there are degrees of freedom to how we can respond to a state of affairs. Now, I read on from the slide. Voluntary behavior depends on the competence to control these degrees of freedom in alignment with beliefs, values, goals, and the demands of the environment and the body. So here we see it's like there's all of these determining influences that lead to an act of will, choice, or decision. So it's not free. So once more, voluntary behavior depends on the competence to control these degrees of freedom. So it can be aligned with beliefs, values, goals, and the demands of the environment and the demands of the body. So this competence is implemented by a network of processes distributed over many brain regions. So hopefully you're still with me. Okay, if you can accept we are required to have a competence to steer the decision, choice, or act of will to make a decision of what option we are going for, well, this competence is implemented by a network of processes which are distributed over many brain regions. So these interwoven processes play out in a continual loop, spanning the brain, body, environment. There is no beginning, no end, and they produce then flexible, goal-orientated behavior. So that's put it in an academic word. Or you could say the elephant is in the driver's seat. So the network really funnels a vast array of potential causes into a single flow of voluntary actions and at times inhibitions. You can't say no. And it is the perception of this network that underpins subjective experiences of volition. So in the next little videos and little chats, we're going to look at that closer and how that actually works.
In the early 80s, Benjamin Libet designed an elegant experiment to help us understand the mechanism of decision-making in the brain. This is the Libet experiment. All I have to do is watch the spinning dot and click a button whenever I feel like it, then report to the scientist at what time I felt the urge to click. Meanwhile, my brain activity is being monitored. Most of us would assume that our choices register as an increase in brain activity and result in us clicking the button. But what's actually observed is a build-up of brain activity, called the readiness potential, a full second earlier than the conscious urge to click. This has been replicated hundreds of times.
What are the implications of this kind of experiment?
So, the folk definition of free will is that your mind controls your body, meaning that your mind is free to decide what to do and send the command to your body. But when you consider the Libet experiment, it means that conscious intentions, instead of being the cause of motor preparation, is the consequence of an antecedent brain activity. So it challenges this dualistic view of mind-body causation.
And so in my group, we've gone back and redone all the Libet experiments very carefully, and we find that you get a readiness potential even in the absence of a motor act, like doing this versus that, if a person expects something to happen. So my own guess is that the readiness potential is tied up with expectation or anticipation that something is about to happen.
Perhaps. So, in fact, at the moment, it's very difficult to know the exact way of, how it works exactly.
The experiment is over. My mind is no longer the controller. Rather, it's firmly seated in my conscious brain, guiding and responding to whispers from my subconscious.
Probably we can say that a lot of our decisions, even not all our decisions, are the result of a prior brain activity. And as an example, there is an elegant study by the team of John Dylan Haynes who showed that by using neuroimaging measurements with MRI scanner, you can actually predict what will be the decision of participants before they are actually conscious of having taken that decision.
This begs the question, how can we have free will if our unconscious brain is making decisions before we do?
The laws of quantum mechanics predict only the probabilities of outcomes, not the results of individual outcomes themselves. According to quantum mechanics, particles like electrons don't have specific positions, speeds, or even paths until they're measured. Instead, they exist in what's called a superposition, a kind of coexistence of all possible states, until the moment they interact with something. For example, we can only ascertain the probability of finding an electron in any particular location until the moment we measure it. Only then do we know for certain where it is. So the result of a quantum interaction is indeterministic, meaning it cannot be predicted in advance. The question is, does this indeterminacy save free will somehow? Free will is the idea that we could have chosen differently. In other words, even though we made a decision, could we wind the clock back to precisely the point where we had made the decision, but this time make a different decision? Suppose we could do that. That is, wind the clock back to make a different decision. But we would need to keep everything else the same. In other words, all the quantum states and other microscopic details would need to be identical. In a classical deterministic universe, the outcome would be exactly the same. The choice would be determined from its initial state. It would be determined from the start. So in such a universe, there's no such thing as having made a different choice. The outcome would be no different. But with quantum mechanics, there's an element of randomness that's introduced into this scenario. The reason is because different outcomes can occur from the same initial conditions. That's what quantum mechanics is all about. That is, we can't predict ahead of time the outcome of any interaction based on its initial conditions. The result of an interaction, which we sometimes label as measurement or observation, will be random. So even if we kept all the microscopic details of all the particles the same, quantum mechanics ensures that the particle interactions may result in a different outcome. So now you might say, there's my free will. Because given the same initial state, there could have been a different outcome because it has a non-zero probability. But here's the problem with that. The fact that different outcomes are possible does not really have anything to do with free will as we have defined it. Just because there can be different outcomes doesn't mean that we manifested that outcome. It just means that some properties of elementary particles turned out to be different with the same initial state. The idea of making a decision is not part of the fundamental laws of physics. Making decisions is an emergent phenomenon that is due to the various electrical and chemical interactions and processes taking place in our brain. And these are due to a lot of different factors. It's something we experience only at human scales, not at a fundamental level. Decisions are classical events, not quantum ones. Most of chemistry is classical. If I had perfect information about all the states of all the chemicals and neurons in your brain, I'd be able to predict what you would do.
The Libet experiment shows that brain activity leading to an action begins before we become consciously aware of our intention to act. Remember the rider and the elephant? The rider, we have conscious intention, but the elephant determines what we do. So the Libet experiment shows that brain activity leading to an action begins before we become consciously aware of our intention to act. In other words, the brain initiates decisions prior to our conscious awareness of choosing. This suggests that our sense of free will, the belief that we consciously generate decisions, may be an illusion, and that unconscious processes and determinism may be guiding our actions long before we realize it. Now, John Dylan Haynes' research builds on Libet's findings, showing that decisions are formed unconsciously seconds before we become aware of them. So in his studies, brain scanning technology could predict a person's choice before the person consciously knew what they were going to choose. This suggests that what we experience as choice is the brain revealing a decision that has already been made beneath conscious awareness. When we put these findings together, a deeper truth emerges. What we call choice may not arise from the conscious mind at all. Instead, consciousness witnesses decisions unfolding from deeper layers of mind and being. But rather than a threat to our freedom, this understanding opens a doorway. It invites us to stop clinging to the illusion of control and instead recognize a more natural power within us. When we surrender the belief that we consciously manufacture every decision, we become receptive to a deeper intelligence, a quiet, steady determination that arises from our authentic self and gently leads us toward truth, alignment, and freedom. Now, Dr. Bernardo Kastrup is a Dutch philosopher, a computer scientist, and a leading voice in the field of metaphysical idealism. So I'll refer you back to podcast number 2, The Theories of Consciousness. So metaphysical idealism represents the view that consciousness, not matter, is the primary reality. Now, he holds dual PhDs in philosophy and computer engineering, has worked in advanced research institutions, including CERN, and currently serves as executive director of the Essentia Foundation. So through his work, he argues persuasively that the universe is fundamentally mental and that what we call the self is a local expression of a deeper, unified consciousness.
There is no distinction between free will and determinism. We think there is because of our conceptual confusion. At the level of what truly exists, there is no such distinction. What nature decides to do is both what it desperately wants to do and what it must do. What nature does is a result of what nature is. Nature wills what it wills because it is what it is. And it can't will otherwise without being something that it is not. Yeah. But of course, it is what it is, so it wills what it does. There is no external environment beyond nature to impose choices on nature. What nature chooses to do comes out of itself. Therefore, it comes out of its being. It's a result of what it is. So nature wills what it must will given what it is. But it does make choices. It couldn't make different choices because it isn't different. Nature is what it is and not something else. It does make choices, but its choices are a direct consequence of what it is. Yeah. So from that perspective, what nature wills is what it must. And what nature must is exactly what it wills. So there is no distinction at the level of nature between free will and determinism. And that's why we can both say, you have free will, because you're a part of nature, and nature has free will. But why does nature have free will? Because it's the same as determinism, and determinism is true. So by the same token, you could also say, everything is deterministic. Why? Because free will is true, but free will is the same thing as determinism. So everything is deterministic. That was the point that I was trying to get across. Of course, we all make choices. We are parts of nature. We make choices every day, thousands of choices every day, starting from whether you touch the ground with your left or your right foot the moment you step out of bed. The idea of determinism does not deny the obvious empirical fact that we are always making choices. What it denies is the abstraction that we call the could have been. I could have chosen differently. Then I would say you could only have chosen differently if you were different. But you were what you were. Yeah. Nature was what it was. So the could have been is an abstraction, and I think it's a fantasy.
And it helps me in a sense that the opposite of determinism is randomness, right? And as you put in your essay, that is not what we mean when we say our free will. You not say it's random. No, you mean it is determined, but it's not determined by. It's determined by what you prefer to be determined by, right? That's what you like to think. I want it to be determined about my wish to sit down here with Bernardo made me sit here down with Bernardo. But then again, it is determined, right? It's not random. So that's also where you run into philosophical problems. So I think analytically your point is very clear. I think just psychologically, we left the conversation saying that, I think we quoted Fred Matzer, and I got a question also. I mean, can you choose to disallow being played by the universe? That's sort of what rang with me.
A lot of people are not allowing themselves to be played by the universe. That, too, is a direct result of what the universe is, because those people are part of the universe. So the universe sometimes disallows itself to be played by itself. That's part of the natural unfolding of what is, what exists. It is such that this contradiction can emerge. Nature is sometimes self-contradictory. This is empirically obvious, right? And not only from a mathematical perspective, from those theorems of the 1930s, but empirically obvious as well. So the point is not that you don't choose. We all choose all the time. The point is there is no could have been. The could have been is a human fantasy. Again, the point is that everything is ultimately determined, because the people who are very much into free will, they would also reject the notion that one's choices are random, the throw of dice. There is no meaning in that. If your choices are random, what meaning is in there? So people who are after free will because they associate with meaning, they themselves will immediately acknowledge that what they mean by it is not randomness. Therefore, every choice is determined. The thing is, the human intuition in this regard says the following: my choices are free if they are determined by me and not by nature at large. What people who are into free will, what they mean by a free choice is that the choice they make, let's say my free will choice is a choice I make, so it is determined, but it's determined by me. It's determined by that which I identify with. I don't identify with my brain activity. I have never seen it. I identify with my conscious inner life. I identify with my preferences, my tastes, my goals, things that I experience from within. So if my choices are determined by my preferences, my tastes, my goals, then they are free-willed choices. Now, there are two arguments why even this doesn't hold water. One is, there is no you separate from nature. A you separate from nature or a me separate from nature is merely nominal. It's an artifact of language. It follows the structure of language, but the structure of reality is not the structure of language. Language is defined for convenience, for communication, and not to capture and reflect the ontological structure of nature. That's not what language is about. So there is no you separate from nature. There is no me separate from nature. So there is no choice I make that is determined exclusively by the linguistic me. Because the me is just molecules in the ocean of nature. It's determined by nature. Another answer is, even if your choices are free in the sense of being always determined by your will, by your preferences, by your plans, who determines your will, your preferences, and your plans? Is it you? Of course not. If you could choose what you want, you would be the happiest person in the world. Whatever your circumstances, you would simply choose to want precisely the circumstances you happen to have. We don't determine those. So our will is literally not free in the sense that we can't just change our wills. We fall in love for who we fall in love. We don't choose who we fall in love with. Otherwise, we would all fall in love with the person who is available. Yeah. That's not how reality works. We don't choose our tastes. We don't choose our preferences. We don't choose even what we want to do in our lives. These things are chosen by nature.
Yeah, and I think
so. What is this business of free will? What do people mean?
What is the aspect of being you that you cling to most tightly? Again, what is the aspect of being you that you cling to most tightly? For many, it's the feeling of being in control of your actions, of being the author of your thoughts. This compelling notion of free will is complex but central. Okay, now, Bernardo Kastrup's insight makes this even clearer. Although we experience ourselves as making decisions, these decisions are not authored by the personal I we believe ourselves to be. Instead, they arise from what we are in truth. What you decide to do is both what you want to do, above all else, and what you must do.
I don't believe in free will, although as I keep saying to people as of late, I am agnostic about most things, not because I don't have a view, like I'm pretty convinced that free will doesn't make sense as a concept, but just because I think it's so easy to be catastrophically wrong in so many ways that I'm just constantly aware that like this I could have missed something crucial at the basis of this thought, right? Free will, at least the kind of free will that I'm talking about, is like agency of your actions, your ability to control what you do. If you rewound the clock, you could have done something else. You could have worn a different shirt today. You could have not come to this talk, something like that. I don't think that exists. That conversation is tied up intimately with the question of determinism. Is everything preordained? But that's not the same question, I think. Like, there could be a universe that is not predetermined, and yet you don't have control over your actions. You know, like a tree does not have control over the way in which it sways, but even in a non-deterministic universe, it wouldn't have control. The interesting question is, like, to what extent are we the authors of our own actions? And for me, there are lots of ways of looking at this, but a good philosophical entry point to this is to consider the behaviors that you do, any kind of action that you ever perform. You either do it because you want to or because you're forced to. Those are the only two options. Anytime you do anything at all, consciously at least. You do it because you want to or because you're forced to. Now, if you come to this talk, it's because you wanted to come to the talk or because you were forced to by some person or something. Now, you might say, okay, well, I didn't really want to come to this talk, but, you know, I thought that, like, it might be good for this reason or that reason, but I didn't really want to. You know, I went to the gym earlier, but I didn't really want to go to the gym. Okay, but we've got to be comprehensive in our analysis here. You didn't want to go to the gym, but you did want to be healthy. You wanted to stay at home and be lazy, but you also wanted to be healthy. Which of those things did you want more? Well, for a fact, we know that what you wanted more was to go to the gym, because that's what you ended up doing. And had the desires been stronger in the other direction, you would have done the other thing. So when you've got a choice in front of you and you're trying to figure out which one you want more, you don't so much decide which one you want more, as you just find out. I mean, like, presumably most of you right now would prefer, if I gave you the option between having a strawberry milkshake and slapping your mother in the face, you would prefer to have a strawberry milkshake. And crudely speaking, I would ask you to try to want the other one. Try to make the other one more desirable. Not the same thing as choosing to do it. Choose to make it more desirable. You can't just do that. You can't control your desires in that way. It's like, okay, well, I could force myself to go and think about my mother in the worst possible terms and like try to compel myself to, and yeah, you could sort of control your wants that way. But you'd have to want to do that in order to do that. And you wouldn't be able to control how much you wanted to do that. In other words, you just push the problem back. So I think you only ever do anything because you want to or because you're forced to. There's a balance of essentially desires. Conscious action it presupposes that there is a way you want the world to be that it is currently not. That's why we act. You know, I pick up a glass of water and drink it because I'm thirsty and I would prefer not to be thirsty. Preference governs actions. But also I'm talking right now, so I don't want to pick up the water. Which of those desires is stronger? My desire to keep talking or the desire to drink the water? Well, you already know the answer to that question without having to scan my brain because it's my behaviors. I don't get to choose that. That's completely outside of my control. As Schopenhauer famously put it, as one of our speakers quoted in the debate last night, you can do whatever you will, but you can't will what you will. And that's the crucial thing. So, is the universe determined or not? I don't know. But that to me is completely irrelevant to the question of whether you have control over your actions. Of course, if the universe is not determined, a lot of people think that's because there's some kind of randomness in physics. Either everything is following a set path from the Big Bang, or maybe at the quantum level, there's some kind of randomness going on. I always like to remind people that randomness is by definition something that you are also not in control of. If something is determined, it means that you can't help but do it. If something is random, which is to say indeterminate, that's the definition of not being in control. So either way, you're not in control of your actions because you're not in control of your wants. But as I say, I think that's a robust philosophical case.
Free will is usually understood as the ability to consciously control our actions. In a universe governed by cause and effect, every action arises from prior conditions, meaning you are not the conscious source of your behavior. Likewise, in a universe ruled by randomness, you still wouldn't be in control, because random events are not you making choices either. Our actions appear to come from our preferences, desires and motivations, from what we want most in any given moment. But here is the key insight. We do not choose what we want. We don't select our desires, impulses, tendencies or motivations. They arise on their own. As philosopher Arthur Schopenhauer put it, man can do what he wills, but he cannot will what he wills.
Along the lines of choice, I'd like to shift gears slightly and talk about free will, about our ability to make choices at all.
Well, my personal way out and left field inflammatory stance is I don't think we have a shred of free will. Despite, 95% of philosophers, and I think probably the majority of neuroscientists saying that we have free will in at least some circumstances, I don't think there's any at all. And the reason for this is you do something, you behave, you make a choice, whatever, and to understand why you did that, where did that intention come from, part of it was due to the sensory environment you were in the previous minute. Some of it is from the hormone levels in your bloodstream that morning. Some of it is from whether you had a wonderful or stressful last 3 months and what sort of neuroplasticity happened. Part of it is what hormone levels you were exposed to as a fetus. Part of it is what culture your ancestors came up with, and thus how you were parented when you were a kid. All of those are in there, and you can't understand where behavior is coming from without incorporating all of those. And at that point, not only are there all of these relevant factors, but they're ultimately all one factor. If you're talking about what evolution has to do with your behavior, by definition, you're also talking about genetics. If you're talking about what your genes have to do with behavior, by definition, you're talking about how your brain was constructed or what proteins are coded for. If you're talking about like your mood disorder now, you're talking about the sense of efficacy you were getting as a 5-year-old. They're all intertwined. And when you look at all those influences, basically, like the challenge is, show me a neuron that just caused that behavior, or show me a network of neurons that just caused that behavior, and show me that nothing about what they just did was influenced by anything from the sensory environment 1 second ago to the evolution of your species. And there's no space in there to fit in a free will concept that winds up being, in your brain, but not of your brain. There's simply no wiggle room for it.
Definition of libertarian free will. The belief that our thoughts and some human actions are entirely freely chosen. Definition of hard determinism. The belief that all events are caused by past events such that nothing other than what does occur could occur. Many people watching this presentation probably think that they believe in both free will and determinism.
For the sake of argument, that you love your father, by which I mean you want him to be alive. And let's also assume that you don't have any attachments to your mother that you might describe as romantic. Well, guess who thought he felt the same way about his parents? Oedipus. According to ancient Greek legend, when Oedipus was born, a prophecy foretold that he would kill his father and marry his mother. So, in an act of colossally bad decision-making, his father left baby Oedipus in the wilderness, assuming he would die, and the prophecy would then not come true. But instead, the abandoned baby was discovered and raised by another family. As an adult, Oedipus learned of the prophecy that he would kill his father and marry his mother. So, not knowing he was adopted, he left his adoptive parents in order to avoid fulfilling that prophecy, figuring that if he wasn't near them, it couldn't come true. Lo and behold, as he was trying to flee his fate, Oedipus killed a stranger in a fit of rage who turned out to be the father he had never met. He then proceeded to marry the dead man's widow, who was actually his mother, though he didn't know it. Needless to say, this is a fate that any of us would like to avoid. But for philosophers, the whole point of the story of Oedipus is there is no escaping fate. Believe in both things, that many of your actions are free and that the world is governed by cause and effect. But it turns out you can't rationally hold both views, because traditionally libertarians have defined free actions according to what's known as the principle of alternate possibilities. That might sound like a plot device for a sci-fi show, but this principle says that an action is free only if the agent, that is the person doing the thing, could have done otherwise. So truly free actions require options. Determinism, by contrast, doesn't allow options. It holds that every event is caused by a previous event, which means that an agent can never have done anything other than what they did, and therefore they are never free. But let's look at these two options more closely, and also let's look at my breakfast. Libertarianism says that my decision to eat oatmeal this morning wasn't necessarily caused by anything that happened before it. Instead, it could have been the result of non-physical events, specifically my own thoughts that originated right at that point. I ate oatmeal because I decided to eat oatmeal. End of story. But libertarianism runs counter to what we know about the workings of the physical world, with one thing causing another. So libertarians need a way to account for their view. One way they do that is by making a distinction between what's known as event causation and agent causation. Event causation means that no physical event can occur without having been caused by by a previous physical event. So many libertarians concede that the physical world itself is deterministic, like a baseball is flying through the air because someone hit that ball with a bat. But many libertarians also argue that there's such a thing as agent causation, which says that an agent, a being propelled by a mind, can start a whole chain of causality that wasn't caused by anything else. So the person who hit the ball most likely did so because they just decided to do it. By this logic, agents have the ability to affect the causal chain of the universe. They can make stuff happen on their own. But many philosophers find this idea untenable. Where would these free decisions, the ones that launch entirely new causal chains, come from, they ask? Are they simply random? What would compel an agent to make one decision and not another? And if you can answer those questions, if you can explain what would cause an agent to act, then, well, you've just reinforced the position that actions are caused rather than free. The fact is, it's pretty difficult to find arguments that support libertarian free will. The best argument in favor of it seems to be that it just feels an awful lot like we're free. And libertarians argue that we shouldn't discount the legitimacy of our own personal subjective experiences. So if we feel so free, we should seriously consider the possibility that we are. That point has a certain intuitive appeal, but if you can't come up with an argument to defend your feeling, then good philosophical reasoning recommends that you reject it, or at least withhold judgment until you can get some evidence together. So now let's see if the hard determinists can do any better. 18th century French philosopher Baron d'Holbach said that none of our actions are actually free. D'Holbach believed that everything that's happening right now is the result of an unbroken chain of events. Everything, he said, is the inevitable result of what came before, including everything that we do. Our actions are caused in the same way that, say, home runs are caused by bats hitting balls, or tornadoes are caused by warm air systems hitting cool air systems in the right conditions. This means that humans and our actions are just part of the physical world, bound by its physical laws. This belief is often explained through a view known as reductionism. Reductionism is the view that all parts of the world and of our own experience can be traced back or reduced down to one singular thing. So, for example, you see your mind as being capable of making free decisions. You think that what goes on in your head when you make a choice is not at all like bats and balls. But, well, mental states are brain states, or at least they're directly tied to your brain, and brain states are biological. And biological states are physical states. And the physical world, as we already said, is deterministic. There's just no room for free will in this picture. We think we're free, but we're not. And really, as scientific thinkers, why would we assume that we are? Why would we think that we're any different than everything else in the universe? What would make us so special? Libertarians are right that it's really hard to disregard the feeling of freedom. If I didn't choose to eat oatmeal this morning, why do I feel like I did? And what made me do it? But hard determinists say that the difference between the causes of human actions and the causes of physical events, like a bat hitting a ball, is that our actions have all sorts of invisible causes that happen in our brains. Specifically, when beliefs team up with our desires and our temperament, they say, you get a deliberate human action. Combine my belief that oatmeal is nutritious with my desire for healthy nourishment and the temperament that predisposes me to enjoy warm, carby comfort foods, and ta-da! You get oatmeal-y breakfast. Now, you might argue that those particular beliefs, desires, and temperaments might lead to any number of breakfast choices, cream of wheat maybe, or some granola. But if you dig deep enough, you'd find that there are factors that rule out those options, as well as every other option. Maybe I'm a little worried one of my fillings is coming loose, so I'm shying away from granola because it's too crunchy. Or I just don't think about cream of wheat very often. I mean, they don't have very good brand awareness anymore. What even is cream of wheat exactly? And the oatmeal is sitting right there in front of me. Or maybe I briefly think of making one of those quinoa breakfast bowls that are so hip right now, but my lazy temperament or my belief that I'm running late pushes me to choose the 90 seconds in the microwave option. See how it works? All you have to do is change one factor, a belief, a desire, or temperament, and you get a different outcome. Hard determinists argue that just because we can't pinpoint the exact factors that led us to an action, we could, in theory, isolate them if we knew enough about all of the beliefs, desires, and temperaments swirling around in our brains. So in this view, what we call decisions are really just the inevitable results of a bunch of mental stuff combining in just the right way. And maybe it feels free, but it's not. But hold up, isn't there some way out of this? Like, what if I have someone choose my breakfast for me? Or what if I fall back on randomness by, like, flipping a coin? After all, if I just flipped a coin, then it wouldn't look like that decision was made by beliefs, desires, and temperaments. But, well, no such luck, because even if I thought I chose randomly, my decision to flip the coin, or who I asked to pick for me, was just as determined as everything else. And guess what? If you're getting angry right now about me telling you that none of your choices are free, well, that anger was determined. If you're finding this whole topic confusing or boring, yup, Still determined? You think you can freely choose to stop playing this video? But if you're still watching me, good news, that's determined too. Determinists believe that you can't help but feel and react the way you're reacting right now. You can think you're choosing to act in ways that conform to the character that you've selected and shaped for yourself, but even that choice is the result of all sorts of already determined factors about you and your place in the world. Hard determinism is tough to refute, and it has some really uncomfortable implications. It means the deeply held feeling most of us have that we actually make free decisions is just wrong. And the whole concept of personal responsibility is thrown out the window too. As Dolbach put it, we're all just cogs in a machine doing what we were always meant to do with no actual volition. Oedipus had to kill his dad and marry his mom. I had to eat oatmeal.
Surprised there's nothing on Google about Eckhart and free will, but maybe I haven't said anything about it. So here we go. As you know, it's an eternal, ancient philosophical question, and there's never been a definitive answer that everybody would agree with in that sense. So is there free will? You mentioned everybody's doing their best because nobody can act beyond their level of consciousness, etc., for example. Okay, let's start from on one level, and then we go on to the next level. On the level of egoic unconsciousness, where you are a conditioned entity, your mental, emotional makeup is totally conditioned by the past, and you are completely identified with the conditioning of your mind, and in that state, that spiritually speaking is the unconscious state, it is obvious that in that state there is no freedom at all, because you are forced to act out the unconscious conditioning of your mind with which you are completely identified. So I think most people would probably agree, if you understand that on that level there is no possibility of freedom. Your actions are determined by your conditioned mind. You are forced to act as you do because there's no choice, because choice would imply some awareness. So on that level, there's certainly no freedom. Then awareness comes in. The human being begins to awaken. Then it appears, I'm not saying it is the case, it appears that then the freedom begins to be a possibility, because you can choose to step out of the conditioning of your mind. You can recognize a conditioned thought, and you are no longer compelled to act it out because there is an awareness there. You can choose a certain course of action, not from the conditioning of your mind, but from the presence. So you can act, and you have much more freedom that before you could not have. Freedom comes with awareness. So it's then relative to the unconscious state, there is now freedom to act. But if you look more deeply, even there on that level, you are connected with the totality of consciousness. You're only an expression of the totality of consciousness. You are not really a separate entity. You are who said it? You are, was it Alan Watts who said you in the same way that the wave is something that the ocean is doing, you are something that the whole universe is doing in the same way. So the wave is something the ocean is doing, you are something that the universe is doing. So although it appears from a certain relative to the previous state of unconscious, there is freedom, and relative to that, there is freedom. But then if you look more deeply into that, you realize that even there, one cannot say that you are choosing this. You are an expression of consciousness. And consciousness, one could say, is choosing, and you think you are doing it. Sometimes people ask me, can you choose to be present? From one perspective, you can choose to be present. From another perspective, one could say that the presence chooses you. It chooses to become present through you. Depends how you look at it. So in ultimate terms, or in relative terms, there is freedom relative to the unconscious state when you become more conscious. But even there, it's only relative to the unconscious state. Even there is not absolute freedom because you do not exist as an independent entity. You are part of the web of interconnectedness that is the whole universe. So in that sense, there is no freedom of choice of the individual because ultimately there is no individual.
Eckhart points out that with awakening and genuine self-awareness, it may seem at first as if freedom appears, as though I now have the ability to choose. But this too is a transitional perception. What actually unfolds is that you begin to recognize that you are not the personal ego at all, but an expression of consciousness itself. Action flows from a universal web of consciousness, not from a separate individual self. Many near-death experiences share a profound insight. Major life events and turning points are not random. They are chosen and mapped out whilst being out of time and the body, including challenging experiences like illness, suffering, or even cancer. And when healing occurs, it involves not just changing the body or circumstances, but unwinding the deeper choice behind the experience. In other words, for healing to be truly lasting, the original plan or agreement must be released and realigned.
Yeah, so it didn't have words. It looked a little bit more like if you ever ride like the subway or the train or SkyTrain or whatever, and you look at the map and it has like a central line and then it has these like deviation points kind of, sort of looked like that. Okay, it kind of looked like that. And that's the closest I could explain it. And each of those points represent like what I call a destiny point, something that your soul wishes to learn in this lifetime. And so before I came into this lifetime, I created that entire blueprint with my guides and my counsel. We stood at that same table. We were like, my soul was like, I want to learn this and I want to do this and I want to do this. And they were like, okay, we're going to put in a near-death experience like somewhere around here. And I'm like, yeah, high five, sounds great. Let's do it. Like we create those things and they kind of counsel us on, you know, yes, definitely take on this experience. Maybe your experience is moving through grief, I don't know, or abundance. It could be any one of those. And they may counsel you on, you know, your last lifetime was very challenging in grief. You might not be ready to take on grief again in this lifetime. So what if we save that for another time? And then you're like, okay, so I won't do that. Like there's a collaborative effort in our lifetime design for what we're going to do. And that's why after we complete the lifetime, we review it with them and go over like what worked, what didn't. And that's where we decide what we want to bring into a next lifetime, right? So if we find there was, say, addictions was a thing that just never, you couldn't move through it in this lifetime, oftentimes people will bring that into a next lifetime to be able to transcend it in some.
I remember opening this, like almost a folder with contracts, but they were basically just agreements I had made in my soul with people before I came here, and some of them were for my benefit and some of them were for theirs. But I remember he didn't force me, but he showed me these contracts, and I could see it going this way diagonally. I wouldn't say to infinity, but there was a number of contracts, hundreds and hundreds, that I could see. And each one of them, the person was there, and in the middle, I was here, and we were doing something, and the contracts were so small. I remember just watching these contracts, and he explained to me that if I were to stay, which means I would have let this overdose take my life away from me permanently, I would have broken these contracts. I just remember him saying, if you don't want these contracts, it's okay. You know, basically God would understand, the universe would reroute itself to accommodate these people, but they'd have to go to, every one of them would have to have secondary or tertiary, third contracts to fulfill it. So if I didn't show up at that date and that time, then someone else would have to show up the day before or the day after. And I thought to myself, I don't want to go back because I don't know what I'm supposed to do. And he said to me, Sunshine, you do know, but it's not time yet. But I remember him telling me, well, how will I know what it is? And he said, you'll know because we programmed your voice. Those that need to find you will find you because of your voice. I didn't have any awareness of my body anymore. The I part of me wasn't there. I was still myself, but I was my expanded self. I was who I was, but at any time I could reach out and it's like I could merge with whoever or whatever. I remember that I made my decision not for myself. That was one thing I do remember, is it was my decision to come back, but I had done it based on the idea that what I had to offer was of value to the people around me, and that I had known these people. I didn't know how, but I had made a contract. What a small, seems like insignificant thing, but to know that our souls are so mapped out. Not that we can't choose it, we absolutely do choose it, but that there's so much time and energy, there's so much care and thought that goes into our pre-planning of our life, the blueprints. I didn't have the life review like other people do. I didn't see my whole life flash before my eyes. No, I didn't.
The soul contract isn't always an easy path. And sometimes people say, well, did we choose our parents? Did we choose the difficult things that happen in our lifetimes? That's the way I'm going to answer that might actually challenge some people, because it certainly challenges me sometimes when I step back and think about what I have personally survived. So did I choose to have cancer? Did I sign up for that before I was incarnated? My immediate answer is yes.
I was in remission for about 3 years, and then my symptoms started to come back. And it threw me kind of into a tailspin, because I'm like, wait, I thought I was healed. I thought you guys healed me. Why am I starting to have symptoms again? And I actually ended up getting pretty sick. I ended up being hospitalized with sepsis. I almost died from this illness. And as I was in the hospital, my angels and my guides came to comfort me, and they let me know that this was happening to me not because I was being punished, but because I still hadn't changed the core belief that had me calling it in the first place. So now I was calling it back in again to keep me safe. And what they explained to me was, I call in an illness to help me to deal with expectation. This is wild. Expectation of being a certain kind of wife, or being a certain kind of mother, or even expectations at work that I am terrified that I cannot fulfill. And so I call in this illness to make it so I don't actually have to be responsible for meeting those expectations. And they had to allow me to bring this back in so they could show me the ways that I could heal myself before and then make myself sick, and then how to bring myself back out of that sickness again. And part of bringing yourself out of that sickness is really getting to the root cause of why you're calling it in the first place. I didn't realize how terrified I was of meeting expectations of other people. I felt like I wasn't good enough. I felt like I couldn't do it. I felt like I was going to be found out to be a fraud. I felt like all of these things. And so a perfect example is if I would have a project at work, I would be fine with the project at work until someone set a deadline. And then I would freak out. And without fail, I would get sick and not be able to meet that deadline. The healing part is something that I'm still always learning about. I think there's so much in healing modalities that is to be learned and to experienced and understood. And my guides have taught me a lot of what it was that I needed to heal. But really, it comes down to, at its core, your belief system. It comes down to, why are you pulling in this illness? What is it that it's helping you to escape from or cope with or cover up? And when you get down to that reason and you actually work to heal that reason, you will find that your health gets better. You can do healing energy work. Absolutely. It works amazing, as it did during my awakening. I was in remission for 3 years. But if you don't heal those core beliefs, you're going to keep pulling it back in.
We don't consciously choose our deepest motivation or patterns. They arise from the unconscious. We've seen that. Yet, and we've also seen this, we can expand our emotional intelligence, reshape the forces that guide us, and let authentic determination lead the way. How? That's the million-dollar question. So let's start with listening to Ruben Laukkonen, completed an award-winning PhD on the cognitive science of insight at the University of Queensland in 2019, followed by postdoctoral research at the Vrije Universiteit of Amsterdam on the computational neuroscience of meditation. In 2025, Ruben founded the Flourishing Intelligence Program at Linacre College at the University of Oxford. Ruben's background includes Zen, Advaita, and Theravada, and his interviews and writings have attracted millions of views. Many people approach meditation and mindfulness as a way to control the mind, another strategy to feel in charge. But true awareness isn't about control at all. As Ruben beautifully put it, the present moment is a ridiculous thing. You can get caught in a loop, and when you think you've arrived at the present moment, there is no present moment. So most meditation and mindfulness teachings tell us to be in the present moment, though, to come back to here and now. What does that actually mean?
Several times. And most meditative and mindfulness practices require to focus on the present moment. So they say, focus on here and now. Does it exist really here and now? What does it mean here and now? Even from experiential point of view, we don't really experience now. We only experience past, now, gone. Oh, that was now. Now, oh, gone. That was now. And then you move from, you're always looking back. So what is here and now? What is present moment? What is time?
Yeah, it's everything and nothing at the same time. So there's kind of two
care to elaborate?
No, I'll try. So either we can say that everything is the present moment, because we only experience the present moment. There's nothing outside the present moment. either we say that it's only the present moment or we're constantly interacting with it. Because when no matter what we observe, even when we're thinking about the past or lost in mind wandering, where is that happening? Well, it's happening in the present. So actually, it's always the present. There is nothing else but the present. That's one perspective to take. That's the kind of ultimate phenomenological position, is that it's all just the present moment unfolding. There's another way to take the present moment, which is as an instruction for meditation, which is also skillful and valuable, which is to say, don't be so sticky. Keep on bringing the mind back to what's in your experience and learn about what's in your experience. That's also skillful, but it's not really the present moment. Because then when we go deeper, as you say, there maybe is no such thing as the present moment if we're going from like a more objective scientific perspective, because indeed, we never interact with the present moment. We are always interacting with something constructed through time. If we were to hit the pure raw senses, for instance, it would be just electrical signals, because it's this simulation is a product of a complex pattern of electrical signals coming in through our sensory systems. And so there are experiences where you encounter something like that, maybe, but it's not very useful. I mean, if you're just like buzzing with electricity and that's all you ever are, I think that's a pretty hopeless. So in some ultimate sense, this present moment is a kind of ridiculous thing. And this is also the irony of the meditation journey, is that you come closer and closer to the present moment. You end up reifying the present moment. You end up kind of getting identified with the present moment. You're like, oh, I just have to keep staying present and stay out of my thoughts, and this kind of weird conflict.
And it's gone, present, gone.
Exactly.
You know, all you're trying is to grasp which already passed, basically.
Yeah, exactly. You get stuck in a loop like this, and you can get stuck in all kinds of loops like this, where you try to be in one state and not the other state, and be in the non-dual state and then not in the dual state, and all of these kind of loops that we can get stuck in. And so the present moment is one of these. And so the irony is that you kind of do need to practice coming into the present moment, but then when the thing bottoms out, there is no present moment, and you recognize that it's all the present moment, and there's nowhere to stand, and that it was always the present. It always was and always will be the present moment, and so therefore, it's everything and nothing, as I said.
Meditation can absolutely help you connect with your true self, your authentic awareness. But if it becomes only a practice of managing thoughts or achieving a state, it can limit growth. Real transformation happens when determination opens you to greater self-awareness, new possibilities, and ultimately awakening, not just presence. Tools like journaling and mind mapping help us uncover the beliefs, biases, and past experiences that still shape our behavior. Through this awareness, transformation doesn't have to be forced. It begins to unfold naturally. Healing becomes lasting, growth becomes effortless. I choose journaling and mind mapping because I think they're easy skills to get on top with. But a lot of people use meditation as a tool, and it's very, very valid. So I want to now listen to a young girl in Canada who practices meditation and the benefits she reaps from it.
Meditated every day, almost every day, for the past 5 years, and I wanted to share with you my biggest takeaways and my biggest 3 lessons from meditating. I don't think it's a practice I'm ever going to stop doing, because it's literally changed my entire life. My whole reality has changed. Hi, Bean. And honestly, I think it's become my whole personality now. So welcome to my new channel. My number 1 biggest takeaway is that you are not your thoughts. I am not my thoughts. When I gained this awareness for the first time, and I was able to view my thoughts from an overhead, almost like third-party perspective, rather than me being in them, and those thoughts being me and me identifying with them, it switched everything for me. Because if I no longer had to identify with these thoughts that were on loop my entire life, then I could just create new ones. I could just create a new script, embody a new script. It was crazy because the more that I sat and I watched, the more I realized that it wasn't me. It was just a program that my mind was running on from a very young age. Most of the scripts that my mind was playing out, I got from my childhood. And it was very evident seeing the specific words and the specific feelings attached to those words. And even sometimes during meditation, like old memories would come up of where I even got that thought loop from, that belief system from. So being able to recognize that I'm not my thoughts completely disconnected me and then reconnected me. I also learned that your thoughts plus your feelings create your reality. And I could very evidently see that in my old character, my old ego, my old self's thoughts and feelings. I was on a constant loop of chronic anxiety, feeling like I was always being judged. I think the school nurse, no, not nurse, the school counselor, she said I had anticipatory anxiety. So I literally lived with anxiety my entire life. It was almost chronic to the point where I couldn't go to school. I would make myself feel so sick before going that I would miss more school days than I would attend, which became an issue in elementary school at a certain point. But anyways, my whole life was running on these thoughts, and I didn't know my life apart from them. When I began meditating, I saw that that anxiety was not me. And it created this beautiful space for those feelings to finally be expressed. And when those feelings were then expressed, related to the anxiety and those thoughts, it's like it was gone. It was released. It was unraveled. There was this knot that was trying to finish, and I never fully allowed the feeling to be felt. So it just kept looping my whole life. So sitting with it allowed it to be released. So that was one of the things. I mean, I think I kind of mixed two into one there, but life-changing anyways. You are not your thoughts and your feelings create your reality. My number 2 biggest realization was that everything you want is just an excuse for an emotion that you're trying to feel. Everything I externally desire. I'm not talking about your 4 basic needs. I'm talking about, let's use an example. I used to break out with acne all the time. Okay, and I wanted clear skin really badly. I tried everything I possibly could try to get that clear skin. But it wasn't the physical thing that was going to heal me. I took it into meditation. I realized that I wasn't allowing myself to fully feel whole and secure in the area of being seen in my skin. And when I realized that there was this block there, I'd go and I visualize myself having clear, beautiful skin. Because beforehand it was not clear at all, and it was a really big insecurity of mine. So it kept perpetuating that insecurity, trying to find an external solution. So I went in meditation, and when I visualized myself with clear skin, the feelings of wholeness wouldn't come up at first. At first there was this blocked energy, and it was like this knot. I was like, oh, this is never going to happen. You're not worthy enough of this. This is not who you are. This is not your character. And it was almost like, yeah, my old script, my old self, ego, was almost addicted to playing in that role of, my name's Datrian, I don't have clear skin. And it might sound surface level or silly, but to me, it was like, it actually meant a lot to me, dealing with it. And like the way it made me feel was not great about myself. And when I finally sat with that feeling, and I didn't see the thoughts as the truth, I was just watching the script play out. Under it was this feeling of unworthiness. And when I sat with it long enough and I untangled it, it released. And then through that energetic release in my body, then my skin started to clear up. It wasn't something externally that I had to go and get. So when I say everything you want is just an excuse for an emotion that you're trying to feel, I never allowed myself to feel secure inside. So that insecurity manifested externally. And for me, that was in my skin. So that is just one small example. It applies to everything that I think I'm separate from. And it's crazy because it's like finding the secret hack to life. Manifest anything that you want, create anything that you desire by just giving yourself the feeling first and embodying it. And then you're shifting into a completely different reality. And I know some people take meditation far into just spirit. And I tried that at first too. In the very beginning of my meditation days, I was like, okay, I have to give up everything. Like monk journey, I have to become a hippie and give it all up and live in a forest. And my boyfriend and I did that for a while. And then as we kept up the practice, we realized, I kind of want to experience this life too. Like, why am I demonizing experiencing what I feel drawn to experiencing? Because we are also living in this body. We are also living in our egos. And it's not a bad thing. I think being able to combine both of them, knowing that you are not fully your body and knowing that you're not fully your thoughts, that you are so much more than that, but then still living in this life and experiencing what you want to experience is an amazing thing to do. That's why we're here. So I don't take, as of right now, I don't take meditation as far as a monk would, where I completely give it all up and I just remain in that spirit realm of just being pure awareness of everything. But it's like a dance.
By opening ourselves to new perspectives, learning from different cultures and languages, serving others through volunteering, engaging in sport and the arts, undoing the patterns that sabotage our wellness, and approaching life with curiosity rather than rigid expectations, we transform our unconscious determination. When we recognize our shared connection with all people and experiences, even the seemingly random ones, life begins to feel guided and meaningful, despite that we don't know who is affected by our influence and who is influencing us. Creativity begins not with certainty, but with a question. It starts in the unknown. To be truly creative, we must learn to be comfortable with uncertainty, and even to unlearn much of what evolution has wired into us. Creativity unfolds through small, deliberate steps that expand our space of possibilities. Each step requires us to question the assumptions that shape how we see reality. The essence of creativity is the courage to doubt what we believe to be true. Only by doing so can we see differently.
How do we manifest based on neuroscience? How would neuroscience suggest we do that?
Yeah. So I have a 3-step process. I love them.
I love them too. I know you do. I know you have a 3-step process.
I love me some steps and making it simple. That goes back to my scientist days. So when it comes to manifesting, it really is the same thing for anything that you want. So the first step is to identify the feelings. Identify the feelings that you believe the thing that you want is going to bring you. I always say you don't want the thing that you want the feeling that you believe the thing that you want is going to bring you. So for example, if you are wanting a relationship, then you might the feeling you might be after is to be loved and feel safe and supported. If you're wanting a whole bunch of money, it might be freedom. It might be security, again, safety and security and freedom, whatever it is, right? So those are a few examples, but whatever it is that you want, write down whatever it is that you want, and then write down the feelings that you believe those things that you want are going to bring you. It's super important to identify the feelings. And I get a lot of questions from people like, what if I don't know what I want? If you don't know what you want, that's fine. You can still write down the feelings that you want, because I think a lot of times maybe we don't know. And I think a lot of times also we think we know what we want, but we don't really know what we want. But it really is the feeling that we're after. And so identify the feelings. That's the first step. Identify the feelings and write them down. And then from there, make 2 lists. The first list is a list of reasons why you already have to feel that way. And so, for example, for me, I actually held a manifestation workshop in my community, and I was I always use personal examples. So mine was 1 million followers on Instagram, and I didn't have it at the time. And live on that call, I realized, oh, what I'm really after is feeling official and accomplished. Like, I want to feel official and accomplished. That's really what I want. And so then I identified those feelings, right? And so then the next step is to write a list of reasons I already have to feel that way. I think a lot of times, again, our brain isn't even letting us acknowledge that we actually can already feel that way in the present. And I was like, I already have this business. I'm coaching people. I'm changing lives. I have a giant following on social media, even if it's not 1 million. I have a lot of reasons to feel official and accomplished already. And writing a list of all those reasons down. And I have people in my community that they print out their resume and put it in their bathroom mirror, like all of the things that they've done, right, to make them feel that way. But write down a list of the reasons why you already have to feel that way.
That's brilliant. I love that.
And then the second list is a list of things, right? So sometimes people will be like, well, I don't have any reason to feel that way. Which to that I would argue, try harder. But there is another list, and the list is a list of things that you can give yourself that you are in control over to feel that way. So if I'm trying to feel official and accomplished, what can I do today to make myself feel more accomplished? Well, for me, I always feel accomplished after I complete a workout. I always feel like I know that I'm writing a book. I can go write a few pages of my book. That will help me feel accomplished. And so, again, what will help me feel official? I mean, the definition, what does official mean to me? I guess for me, it's just like, oh, I made it. And I guess that for that, I could go and maybe read comments of people like saying like, oh, you really helped me or whatever it is. So what are some activities that you can do to give yourself that feeling? And I think combining the two is important, right? Because again, acknowledging all the reasons why you already have to feel that way, but then also becoming more aware of things that you can do in the moment to make yourself feel that way. And when you start doing that, and after like 2 months after doing that practice on myself, I hit 1 million followers on Instagram. And I do believe and know that it shifted my energy, right? Like, I'm creating now from a different space of feeling more official and accomplished. And so I think that kind of process of identifying the feelings, recognizing all the reasons you already have to feel that way, and then becoming aware of things that you can do to help yourself feel that way even more. When you start doing that, now you have the feelings that you want already. And now you're in a place where you can also be detached from the outcome. It's not going to stop you. You should still go and work toward the thing that you're wanting, right? But that's how you rewire your brain. So that's sort of the neuroscience component. Of course, we could go way deeper into this and talk about this for hours. But this is sort of like my short, condensed 3-step neuroscience component to becoming a match to whatever it is that you want. And now when you're going and working toward the journey, when I was going and working toward 1 million followers, now I'm working toward it with a different energy. I'm working toward it as a match to whatever it is that I want.
When a creative person seems to make a giant imaginative leap, what we are really witnessing is their openness and willingness to challenge assumptions, allowing them to move through mental steps that others cannot see. In this way, creativity is not the opposite of logic. It is logic at its most evolved and imaginative form. We covered a lot. So to hopefully bring it all together, I've prepared 10 journaling prompts, and I intended to take you on a journey through these journaling prompts now at the end, going from self-observation to becoming aware of unconscious conditioning, purification through releasing guilt, finally toward creativity, authentic determination, and awakening. So hopefully we can all agree now that freedom is not the ability to control every thought or choice, but the willingness to awaken to what is already shaping them, and then allowing for the transformation to occur. Like, what would it mean for you to live from awareness rather than from the illusion of control? So go for it. Like, there is no right or wrong. If you rather meditate and journal, so be it. It's your choice, your decision. It's your unconscious determination that will decide what it is you do. All right, thanks. And see you back for podcast 6.